And besides money, what else is important? Perhaps connections, some good relationships with the Banjars. Maybe. Money brings connections. Without money, there will likely be no connections. I prioritize money above all. In the last interview, I said that money will kill this island, but I put it at the forefront. At the forefront because, well, it is precisely through certain commercial relationships, when you give first, that connections are formed later, and people begin to trust you more. So overall, if you are familiar with the Banjars, if you are acquainted with the local community, with someone there, I don't know, from the government, that's great. But if you get into trouble, none of them will pull you out for free. Moreover, each of them will try to profit from you.
I understand. So overall, if you are doing business in Bali, what should you understand in advance? How are the taxes different here? Are they lower than in Russia, or maybe on the contrary, higher? You have already noted that it is important to have resources and money to solve certain issues.
Taxes are definitely lower. Overall, the tax system here is very different in that any payment is some kind of tax that you have to pay on it, both incoming and outgoing payments. They are divided into a bunch of different subtaxes. If you optimize the company correctly, then on average you have a tax on outgoing money of around 3 to 4% compared to the wild double taxation in Russia. There are many ways to reduce taxes because the Balinese do not have a strong grasp of financial control and do not fully understand how to do it. One's own, and even more so others, can be done at the expense of the fact that in the tax service, returning to money, there is an opportunity to pay much less in taxes simply by coming in and giving the necessary amount to the appropriate officer. Probably, before opening a company, it is very important to understand not just the taxes, because I can tell you right away, it's just a formula. You can optimize them to 3 to 4%. That's not a problem. It is important to understand what type of activity you will be engaged in and whether this type of activity, especially if it is an offline business on land, can be located in the point where you want it to be. Well, almost everyone is involved in construction in Bali, so this is how the situation stands. Are you referring to the recent projects and how the situation stands regarding making agreements on the land?
Suppose you want to become a developer. You need to legally formalize everything in any case and understand what taxes you will be paying, what costs are included in the project's cost. For example, as I understand it, the taxes are not that high, but the advantage is that they can be optimized by giving bribes to the right people.
Yes, that's one thing and more. If we are talking about development, I have seen a channel more focused on development and construction. The tax will probably be a bit higher, so it's better to initially calculate the worst case scenario for taxes, meaning you should assume that you will have about a 10% tax. The plus will greatly depend on your turnover, because if your turnover exceeds $350,000 a year, you probably know that in any of the first 3 years of the company's existence, you will be subject to an additional VAT rate and must charge your client 11% VAT. Few construction companies show it, but it is always included in their price as a rule. A particularly large developer cannot avoid this VAT, meaning we always pay these 11% practically when we approach the developer. I noticed that when buying real estate from large developers, especially foreign ones, they always write plus VAT 11%, but they don't account for part of it. Do you think they simply don't pay it, or do they pay it on your behalf? I think they are probably paying for you, but there is an option not to take that into account. There is a way to bypass this situation with double contracts, which is what developers do here. Overall, at the dawn of the development activity, during this development boom, many were thinking about how to avoid this VAT. But now there are schemes where a developer can open, for example, one company that can build 5 to 7 point-ton units, and in this way, quite smoothly avoid the tax.
Are there risks for the investor if the developer evades taxes?
Absolutely, indeed. The main risk is that potentially double contracts are created, and one contract, in the form of a civil law agreement between the client, who wants to purchase a property here, and the developer, they sign it, and this contract is not registered anywhere. Accordingly, how can you protect your rights if, for example, the developer promised to built it, but did not deliver, or did not build at all, or even had no plans to build and sold a beautiful picture? In other words, you are completely unprotected in this situation. In the best case, you need to fly to Indonesia, file a lawsuit, and resolve it in a civil law format like this.
So what we call undervaluation, right?
This is called undervaluation of the asset, yes, when you have the main agreement, so-called, or investment agreement, depending on the procedure by which you are purchasing. And accordingly, the price is stated as 300,000, while with notaries it will actually be indicated as 100,000, for example.
Your recommendation is not to buy properties where there is an undervaluation during the construction phase.
Well, if you have to choose between this and that, yes, I think it's always better to agree on splitting the taxes, like 50-50, because the Balinese developer has to pay this tax, but he doesn't want to, just like all the Balinese who, probably when you arrive on the island, you become like all the Balinese and also don't want to pay taxes. And he doesn't want to pay taxes, but he has to. That is, if we talk and split the tax 50-50, it wouldn't be bad, especially since there are various procedures to slightly reduce the tax. But it can be lowered by separating the cost of individual rentals and the cost of buying and selling. This way, one can save quite a bit.
Hey, I wanted to know about opening a legal entity because many people who want to buy real estate in Bali consider, well, buying or renting. There are different concepts. They want to register it as freehold, and for that, it is necessary to open a legal entity. Please describe the procedure for opening a legal entity in case I want to acquire real estate in freehold.
It's very simple. You can actually, by the way, not even fly to Bali. Well, legally you can't, but in reality you can. So this is where we start having these moments of what you can and cannot do. According to the law, you must arrive in Bali and you must have a valid closed passport for at least 30 months. In principle, it is not important for opening a company, but as a rule, people then apply for a residence permit in Indonesia for 2 years. This is important for the residence permit. Therefore, to avoid redoing the documents in the company repeatedly, it is better to ensure the passport matches from the start. Accordingly, you need to come up with a name for the company, check it in the registry, which is usually done through a notary. Because you can probably check it yourself, but everything is in Indonesian. You know what the translations are here in English and God forbid in Russian, so it's quite difficult. It's better to do this with a notary or just by coming to us. Check the company name, then you specify the types of activities that this company will engage in. It is good to specify consulting just in case as one of the types of activities you will be engaged in or for optimizing payments. You will pay much less in taxes for consulting than for receiving money as income from the sale of real estate. Documents are submitted, and in about 3 weeks, the company, along with a fairly large list of documents, actually exists in VAF PDF files.
Interestingly, it is possible to remotely open a legal entity, but if you want to, you still need to fly in, regardless.
Yes, you definitely need to fly in, I understand, but for the real estate transaction in freehold, you will need to come right. Yes, you will need to fly in. There are several reasons why this needs to be done. Firstly, you can appoint a director, specify them in the company's charter documents, and pay them a salary. They will do a lot for you. But for this procedure, it is still better to be the director of your own company and obtain this kit, because it will reduce your personal tax base from 20% to 10%, like for locals, on your income as an individual. That is, if you are going to use this company for commercial activities, for example, or if it will be generating some income, you will want to withdraw that income from the company. Well, it's better to pay 10% on dividends than 20%.
Do you need a kit to be exactly a resident?
Kitos is a kind of precursor. Kitos is needed to obtain a tax number. When you obtain a tax number, you already become a resident of this country.
Is the difference between basically a non-resident and a resident are 20% for a non-resident and 20% for a resident? Yes, correct.
Well, regarding the personal income tax, yes.
Does this also apply to the sales tax on the property and the income from renting it out?
We recently discussed a wild case with the lawyers. One scammer in Bali accused another person, a Russian-speaking individual in Bali, of violence. It's a fairly standard story. Here, people love to gossip about each other's violence, which means they tend to be quite petty. In the end, the scammer received the money. A mutual agreement was reached, and the person was released from prison. In fact, he didn't violate anything, of course. It was necessary to give a part to the universe, and he did. He gave a certain amount. And we sat down with the lawyers discussing whether this person, who received income here in such a way, should now pay tax. given that he was allegedly raped. It turned out that yes, he did not have a kaitesa, so she has to pay 20% on that. Whether he paid or not, I don't know. But the point is that there is any income, you pay 10 or 20%.
And residency is confirmed specifically by the kitas. If, for example, I am here on a business tourist visa for a year, yes, in Russia it's just over 6 months, which means you are already a resident.
Yes, 183 days.
183 days, yes. Here, a kitap is specifically needed to confirm residency. They simply won't do it on a tourist visa.
Indonesia says that if you live here continuously for more than 180 days, you automatically become a resident. In reality, that's not true. Because you don't have a tax number, you can't even file a declaration.
The tax number is the main point that distinguishes residents from non-residents.
Yes, that's correct. The tax number lets you file a tax return. Without a tax return, you cannot declare your income.
And everyone who receives a kitas already has a tax number by default.
No.
No, you need to do it yourself.
Exactly. Well, let's say you received a kitas as a director. Next, you need a tax number as a director in order to register this company. Accordingly, you contact us, we create a tax number for you, we connect you to the remote reporting system, and only after that can your company and you personally, as the director, file taxes here in Bali.
Hey, let's go back to the deadlines.
You said it takes 3 weeks to register a legal entity. Yes, and if we consider the process together with the ketos, from the moment I conditionally reach out to you, for example, to the moment I receive the ketos and have a company, how much time passes? If you came here directly for registration, let's do it step by step. In 3 weeks, you will have a company. It can be earlier, but in 3 weeks. Next. You are applying for a visa which is now called E28A. It was previously known as C314, the investor visa. The basis for issuing you an investor visa is a sponsor, which is your company. A legal entity that is conditionally a citizen of Indonesia and has a tax number. Accordingly, this is your sponsor. Your sponsor applies for this visa, and it usually comes out about 2 to 3 weeks after the application is submitted. If you haven't had any violations here, you will most likely receive this visa. Next, you must arrive here within 3 months after this visa is sent to you in PDF format. When you arrive here within this period, you arrive, and they put a stamp in your passport at the border crossing. I show that I have a PDF file with the visa. You get a stamp for 30 days, indicating that you entered on this visa, and they tell you that you have 30 days to obtain your kitas. You, accordingly, with this passport, with the stamp, with the company documents, usually go to us, meaning that this is all typically included, or you go to the migration office. In this migration office, they schedule an interview for you, and they make a decision whether to issue you the final visa for 2 years or not. They ask what the company will be doing, and now they start asking about the authorized capital, beginning to pose tricky questions to avoid nominal companies. You naturally know what to answer. You respond and get your kit sorted in total from the moment you decided to open a company, somewhere around a month and a half if you move in right away. You ask if there are any risks. For example, could they refuse? Are there such cases? We didn't have a single one that we could refuse because we usually check this story in advance. But there are cases when applications were denied due to reasons such as discrepancies in documents, the state format of certain documents not matching the state format of documents in Indonesia. For example, we had a case where a person from Riga could not obtain a kitos because he has a certain status. If people live in Latvia, it is called, I don't remember the exact wording, but in English it is written as alien, meaning extraterrestrial. So basically he submits his passport and the Indonesian guys look at it, see that it says alien, and they say, well, we don't issue visas for aliens. As a result, he cannot obtain the kitas, meaning he could have gotten a visa here. But he couldn't get a kitas visa, a tourist visa, but he couldn't get a kitas. It seems that they don't help foreigners in this regard for some reason.
In general, these are risks if you submit it yourself, so to speak, or through some company that is not very competent in this area.
Either you have an inappropriate citizenship, like for example Israeli.
By the way, it's interesting regarding Israeli citizenship. You see, it's even difficult in principle to fly to Indonesia. You need some special visa. They also won't issue a kitab to citizens of Israel.
Well, the price of the issue is, again, about $5,000, that is, from $5,000 to $15,000, and you will arrive. But actually, according to the law, it is not allowed.
And how much does it cost approximately? for both a legal entity and, for example, a kite for one person?
The cost of a kite is $1,100, $1,200.
For 2 years, right?
Yes, a legal entity is about the same.
I understand.
Well, don't forget that for a legal entity, you need a regular office here, meaning you need a registered address for the legal entity. The office costs $400 a year.
Is it some kind of virtual office? Or is there a real office there?
With this wording, the virtual office has been struggling for the last 2 years, saying virtual, virtual. In fact, this is a virtual office. Here in Indonesia, there is even a type of activity related to creating virtual offices for companies. That is, it is important that the contract you have with the office states that this office has a license for creating virtual offices, meaning we check this with our partners. You probably know that IT companies are considered high risk, just like developers, by the way, in some cases. Therefore, there are certain high requirements for them, including for the offices. Well, this office was checked, many were not, because when you usually see an advertisement here for an office gift, there is usually nothing there, just the address is included, and in fact, this becomes a very big problem later. And they can come, for example, for an inspection, and as I understand it, they will come specifically to this address.
It's easy, go there if there's an inspection. If they find out there's an elephant, they say we don't even know who they are. What risks are involved in this case?
It's very simple. A letter comes from the Foreign Investment Control Service, usually checking on businesses in the first 2 to 3 years. They say that they couldn't find you, you haven't contributed your charter capital, and it's unclear how to contact you. So let's see. First, change your office to a physical one. Second, contribute at least 10% of the charter capital. Third, appear for clarification at the OSS service. If not, we will take your license away from you.
So, in any case, it will be somewhat gentle, right? They won't immediately say we are closing your business. First, they will reach out with a request to clarify, settle, or resolve this issue.
Yes, but it's not very lenient because the statutory capital there is 10% for 2 people, let's say. Now it's a minimum of $1,400,000, which you specified $1,400,000, so $140,000 is not very lenient actually if you want to continue doing business here.
By the way, regarding the founders, there should be at least 2, right?
There must be at least 2 founders.
As I understand it, 1 commissioner and 1 as the main founder.
1 director. So why 2? Because you must have at least 2 officials in the company, 1 director, the other commissioner.
But here's a question, for example, let's say I want to buy real estate in freehold, but I don't have someone I can list there. Can I include, for example, my wife or one of my sons so that there are no outside individuals as owners of the company?
Well, that's how it's always done. The only thing is, according to Indonesian law, you cannot do business with your wife. That is, technically, you cannot register your wife, which is a problem. Let's say if you and your wife have the same last name, we always work a little in advance, asking if it will be possible to apply this way. If the last names are different, there are no problems because you understand that your marriage certificate from Russia in Indonesia will not come up, but you need to be a little more cautious, meaning if you opened a business with your wife, you should be careful not to flaunt your marriage certificate too much.
But if one surname, for example, belongs to a son or a father-mother, is that not considered normal?
Yes, that's fine, yes.
And you also talked about human capital. What amount is needed per person now?
Now it's a minimum of 10 billion rupiah per person. Accordingly, they want even more. In fact, they have already introduced it, but they want 10 billion for one type of activity as well. They really like the amount of 10 billion.
It's $700,000. Now it's less.
$700,000. The dollar is rising. $700,000.
Yeah. Well, again, not everyone has that amount.
What is the current practice in Bali? Who contributes, who does not contribute? And what are the associated risks? No one is investing. I mean, absolutely no one. Not even the developer with money is investing because it's just, well, it's a nightmare. I mean, $1,400,000 for a company. Let's say you want to start a laundry business here. Laundry opening. Which $1,400,000 are we talking about? A laundry opening costs around $10,000 to $15,000, but not $1,400,000. That is, you do not need such working capital, which is why many businesses here create jobs. It is very important that if you understand that you will be doing real business, then go ahead and do it. No problems. Submit monthly reports on time. Of course, submit quarterly reports, annual reports for yourself, for the company. Well, play ahead as much as possible. Ideally, you should gradually increase your authorized capital once a quarter. It's easy to do. You simply have a financial report each month as a result of your financial activities. Accordingly, based on these financial reports, you have some surpluses. You can withdraw these surpluses as dividends without paying taxes and return them back to the company's current account as a contribution to the authorized capital. So you gradually increase your authorized capital little by little. Well, I think the most important thing is to play ahead and show that you are a real business. Real businesses are not nitpicked.
But if I go back, for example, I acquired property in freehold just so that I would have property in freehold, or that I created a legal entity, yes. For example, if I live somewhere in Spain, in Moscow or elsewhere, I don't want to deal with filing reports showing that the business is actually existing and so on. Who even takes care of this? I would need to find an accountant again.
We are directly involved in all of this.
How much does it cost to maintain this legal entity per year?
If you have no transactions at all for the legal entity, like in your example, you simply maintain the balance. This costs about $400 a year in total.
$400? Yes, got it. Well, speaking of the fact that you need to show at least some capital base, you can kind of show real estate that is registered under this legal entity, and that already reduces the questions. There are much fewer questions.
There are a few. Well, I do this for myself. Of course, because they are not on paper anywhere. But for me, when I interact with regulatory authorities, I have a general understanding of the categories where they nitpick and where they do not. If you have less than 10% of the authorized capital there, they may ask you to contribute at least 10%. Overall, this is quite lenient. Overall, it is favorable, especially if you have money. The next category is up to 25% of the equity capital. If you calculate based on developers, if you have closed 25%, most likely no one will ever approach you again regarding the issue of contributing the authorized capital.
Regarding the Kitos, it is granted for 2 years, and then you can request an extension. Is the cost of the extension the same as what you initially paid for the Kitos? So after a 2-year period of a so-called Kitosa, we have what is called a Kitap, right?
Yes.
What is it exactly, and how does it differ from Kitosis, or is it more or less the same?
It doesn't differ at all in terms of your rights. It's just issued for 5 years, and it looks different. So, do you have a Kitos?
I have it, yes.
There are 2 papers, one large, A4 size, and the other one is small. You print out, laminate, and then show everywhere. And here is this card, very similar to an Indonesian ID card, closer, but somewhat of a color mix between a Kitos and an Indonesian ID card.
This is an intermediate stage of Indonesian citizenship.
Next, you can apply for citizenship.
Does anyone actually obtain Indonesian citizenship? As I understand it, you can't have dual citizenship here.
Yes, but people naturally avoid this situation because it is not very convenient for many. In fact, Indonesia does not grant such a large number of rights, but rather takes away many. That is, it is a large Muslim country, the largest Muslim country in the world. So, as a citizen of Indonesia, this is a delicate legal point. And I'm afraid I might be mistaken, but I believe you should. Every citizen of Indonesia automatically adopts Islam at birth. Because every citizen of Indonesia at birth automatically adopts Islam,
there was some autonomous territory.
In this regard, it was an autonomous territory. Well, but in this regard, it was an autonomous territory. Yes, but yes, but you see, I travel all over Indonesia to different islands, so I might be mistaken about this. Is there such a requirement for Bali? Most likely there is not for Bali because they are very confrontational between Java and Bali, the islands, ideologically and culturally. So, probably, yes, there is no such requirement, but I really don't understand why one would want to obtain such a passport other than to conditionally escape from some unpleasant living conditions in another country. Well, it's just that you are buying a freehold as an individual, that's all. Listen, yes, maybe, but what will it ultimately give you? Well, besides the fact that you can buy real estate here as an individual, I don't know, it seems to me.
Listen, what about the Kitos? Let's say I found a commissioner and the 2 of us received this Kito. Can I still, for example, if I have children, register Kitsos for them or not?
It's easy. Now, you can receive benefits for children and close relatives as a parent. This wasn't available before. 3-4 days ago, this news came out. A family kit came, so to speak. It has changed, and now you can even make such a kit for parents. It costs about 16 million for 2 years, in my opinion. That's also $1,000.
So can guests with an investor visa create a family visa for their family members?
They attach it to their investor kit. The investor kit serves as a foundational matrix to which these family kits are attached.
Here's another question. When buying leasehold, many people complete the transaction remotely, even signing with a notary. What about freehold? Can this also be done remotely? And in general, how common is it to finalize deals remotely?
I have serious doubts that it's worth completing a freehold deal remotely. First, there are much greater financial risks. In a freehold, you are simply risking a much larger amount of money. Secondly, you still need to have a director here in Bali who will sign the financial documents. Without a kit, you cannot sign this, so it turns out that actually it's best to come here and do all of this yourself. Usually people come here for 2 to 3 weeks to a month, first looking at what is available, such as land properties. They are shown around everywhere, and everyone tries to sell them something, and they go, ooh, in rose-colored glasses, Bali, how beautiful it is. We all want to be here. They leave, reflect on it all, open a company remotely, then arrive there after a month, already understanding what location they have, approximately how much it will cost, and then, for example, they acquire this plot of land.
Another question regarding the freehold. We understand that it is for 80 years, but in reality, it is divided into 3 parts. So there are 30, 20, 30, and what is the purpose of this at all? Are there any risks, for example, that I have what seems like a freehold, but it's for 30 years, and then there might be some extension that can be granted to me? What is the procedure, and so on?
We all need to forget about 80 years. This is very important because it seems like we are shifting the responsibility for our agreements onto someone else, in this case, the state. There are no 80 years, there are 30 plus possibly 20 plus maybe another 30. Every time there is this story with possibly, because firstly, Indonesian legislation is constantly changing. If they are currently interested in attracting large amounts of money, then after some time, when there is more money here, when, for example, the local labor market starts to suffer because no one wants to see foreigners in high-paying positions due to issues with this, the government may start tightening the screws and say, guys, what's up? We don't need your money anymore. This is not so interesting for us. We have already built everything here. Take your money and leave. And they could close your opportunity to open a business or revoke your company's license. The state still holds all the power. Therefore, there are 30 years, and then for these 30 years, the plot of land is transferred from the owner to the state. Accordingly, you continue to interact with the state for all these 30 years. The state is still somewhat of a holder of this land, but you are the owner, according to all the documents, your company. Then, after 30 years, you come back to the government officials and say, I want to extend. Extend if you still have the right to extend at that moment, because right now you do.